It's hard to say that Disney and Marvel are not having a good time right now because that's been the case since forever, and you've heard it from every YouTuber. So these are just some of the recent issues that have come up and my perspective on them, which includes the entire plot of the new Marvels movie being leaked, and it sounds like another one of these multiverse movies that I couldn't care less about. But when the entire plot leaks, it's a bad look for them. There are already people saying that this is a way for them to save face when the movie comes out because it's going to be so bad that they can just blame the performance on the leak. I don't think that they would do that. In fact, I'm sure that Disney and Marvel hates that any information ever gets out that they didn't release on purpose in the form of trailers and stuff like that. The one thing I don't believe is the movie is only an hour and 45 minutes, what used to be the standard length for a movie. But when these Marvel movies got big, every movie became 2.5 hours, and I've been wishing that movies would go back to this. I don't dislike long movies necessarily. It's just that Marvel movies and action movies should just stick to the shorter length because these movies don't benefit from the longer length. Sure, The Dark Knight made sense, but did Eternals really need to be 2 hours and 37 minutes? So if Marvel's gotten the memo about that, then I'm happy, even if the movie is one that I was never going to watch. If it leads to movies going back to shorter lengths, then I'm happy, but maybe I'm just being too optimistic. And with the amount of shit that they have to cut from these movies these days, after all of the screen tests and reworking it, maybe that's all that's left that they can actually work with. Isn't that crazy too that all of these huge movies have to do these screen tests to make sure that what they're making is something that people will actually watch instead of just focusing on making something that's good and having pride in what you've created, that you can actually stand by it? But this movie already had its screen test and it fucking sucked. So I suspect that this is just one way that they can salvage the mess that is this movie. An hour and 45 minutes that kind of makes sense, at least enough for the average fan to get what they were going for. That's what happens when directors start working on a new project before this one's even finished, and the people who are tasked with working overtime to fix the special effects are underpaid, especially since half of these movies are just going to be CGI. And it's funny how quick things can change. They're already talking about bringing back the original Avengers, as if it's been that long since the Endgame, but the way that people are talking about it as if it's the last resort to survive and keep relevance, do you see how insane that is? Like, how quickly do they need to be making money and profits? Like, they bring out so many movies at once that people are talking about them falling off when Endgame only came out 4 years ago. And also, if we're talking about the whole cast bringing back a certain character so quickly, would definitely take away from the ending of that movie. It would be like if it didn't even happen, which is the problem with the multiverse movies in the first place. And it sounds like some manipulation, like they're toying with your emotions and dragging you out into the theater, bleeding you dry of your money and your humanity. They're fucking vampires. That's not an original take, but that's how they are. They're not doing anything original to warrant a more in-depth analysis than that. And most of Marvel's successes recently have all been based around one character, and that's Spider-Man. Whether it's the new movies or the games. The new Spider-Man game, I think, got like 8 out of 10 on IGN. And that also brings up another question. Has Spider-Man peaked? Like, we had the movies back in the early 2000s, as well as the games, if you remember. But then towards the end of that decade, you had the Amazing Spider-Man movies, which were fucking awful. And the character was kind of dead for a while until the Avengers movies, when they introduced him again. So, do you think that that's also happening here? Like, after these new movies and recent games, is the character just going to completely fall off for a while again? But with all of these successes based around this one character, it does beg the question, is that all that Marvel has to offer now? And if you haven't heard anything about what's going on with Disney and the upcoming Snow White adaptation, then you haven't been paying attention to anyone that covers movies. Every right-wing pundit you can think of has been talking about this movie. There are pundits that are being birthed at this very second because of this movie. And if you haven't heard, the latest is that they're delaying this movie for another year. And everyone is talking about this movie as if they would have even watched it 10 years ago, as if they're really fans. I can understand when people get mad at these remakes because they don't reflect what the original was, and it being shit in comparison, but getting mad at this shit is just sad. You've been sucked into this bullshit. Why would you give a fuck about a kids' movie? You don't. But you've been manipulated into believing that not only is this shit important, but that you actually care about it. And if the movie is still good after all of this, its supposed shortcomings, does all of this woke stuff even matter then? If it's not affecting the art that you enjoy, you start to see that you've been sucked into this weird political thing. When you start to go down these paths and actually think about this logically. And I am not saying that this movie is going to be good. I would never put my money on a live action adaptation of an animated movie being good. But what I am saying is, if it is legitimately good, does the woke stuff even matter then? Because wasn't that what all of this was about? Which is that the woke stuff affects the quality of the art, and that's why it's bad? And if it doesn't, does it even matter at that point? That's what I need to know. Do people move on to the next thing after this? I hope people get what I'm saying, because I don't actually have a problem if a movie's got like conservative messages or whatever the fuck. As long as the movie's good, I couldn't really give a shit. But can you actually say the same?